Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
And good afternoon, and welcome to the first Back to the Father of 2025. It is Friday, the 4th of January, and we're so happy that you are with us on this program. And in case you are here for the first time, or maybe you're watching the recorded version of this, this is a show that we started probably about 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago. It's been a while. And the whole idea was to have a program that focuses on the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas, especially in his magnum opus, his famous Summa Theologia, because really most of the fundamental teachings as explained in the Catholic Church today come from a synthesis that St. Thomas Aquinas put together back in the Middle Ages. And, of course, there were a lot of, the philosopher and theologians that kind of led up to that. And there's been a lot that's happened since then as well. So it just seems like there probably ought to be a show that focuses specifically on St. Thomas Aquinas. So if this is of interest to you, then I welcome you. And you're always welcome to chat, leave comments, leave questions. I sometimes bring the only person that I can actually visibly see into the conversation. In this case, it's Joe Loney. So, Joe, how are you doing? Good to see you.
Good, Dave. I love being on my favorite show on the GRN. I say it every time.
I know. I appreciate you being on. So, a couple of things we want to accomplish today. And I actually thought of this after the fact. Is in the second part of the program. And by the way, we don't have to go an hour because when you're on social media, you can just kind of go as long as you want. I mean, there's no clock. There's no, you got to take breaks. You got to do this. And so we just kind of go until we feel like we're done. It may be 20 minutes. It may be an hour. It may be, 42 and a half minutes. But we're just going to kind of see. But this is the idea that I had for the second topic of the show. Okay, now I'm going to need a little interaction with you, Joe, for this one.
I got it.
Is what can you not know in philosophy? Okay, did that make sense? Like, for example, here in cars, okay, like cars and the mechanics of a car.
Yeah,
there's certain things you can't not know. You can't not know.
You know that your car needs gas.
Exactly. Great example. Okay, you got to know that every now and then when that line gets to the E, you got to fill it up with gas. You don't probably need to know how the carburetor works and the
internal workings and the wiring. You probably don't need to know that.
So in like in the medical field, okay, you don't. No one's going to know as much as a surgeon about the body and anatomy and all that, but there's some things you got to know. I mean,
a fever.
Yeah, exactly. You got to know what a fever is. Why did my body just turn very hot? Just basic things. Why am I getting this rumbling in my stomach? Maybe it's time for me to eat. I mean, there's certain biological things that you have to know, right? In your field, I was thinking about engineering. Like, that's a tough field. But there's certain things that you got to be able to know how to turn on a computer, reboot it. There's certain things that a functioning adult needs to know how to do, right?
Bare minimum as a part of the job, you need to know something how to work it. So,
and you probably get very frustrated that a lot of people don't even meet that minimum standard in things.
Trust me, I don't meet that minimum standard.
Like
sometimes
your present
it's okay.
company. But so that's the point, is that when it comes to philosophy, now this is, I got to admit, this sometimes kind of frustrates me a little bit because I think the bar is so low about what people think they need to know about philosophy that the normal response is kind of like with me in engineering is like, I'm never going to understand it. It's too much. It's too complicated.
I'm not even going to bother trying.
My brain doesn't go there, so I'm not even going to bother trying, right? And that's okay. But like I said, there are some things, even in engineering, that you got to know. There are certain things about your car you got to know. Or you're going to set yourself up for a lot of trouble, and you can do this in anything. There's certain things in mathematics that you need to know. Okay, if you can't add 5 + 5 and get 10, you're going to have a tough life. I remember taking a calculus class when I was in college, and sitting there, and it was calculus 2. I was a freshman in college. And the teacher could have just as well been speaking Greek because I had no idea. And I kept thinking, like, was it like differential equations and all these little things and
Slope and line
yeah,
graphs.
yeah.
And, all
And
that
I
kind
was
of
just
stuff.
like, I'm never going to use this. It's never going to apply to my life. And I actually was right. I never in my life have ever had a moment where I needed to work out a differential equation.
I need the graphing calculator out now.
And so, but many times in my life, I've got to be able to add. I got to be able to give waiters tips and know what 20% is versus 15%. Although nowadays, sometimes they put it on the receipts. You see that?
I've seen them, but sometimes I think that the math is not completely accurate. That's my
really?
conspiracy. That's my
Oh, wow.
deep conspiracy, but it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Tipping is a whole nother thing. So, all right. So all that is a way of setting up the topic today of what we're calling is applied Christian philosophy. What can you not afford to not know when it comes to philosophy? Okay. And I'll give you an example of very practical life, and you may disagree on this one, Joe, but certainly free to disagree. I think if you don't know what Marxism is, that's gonna be a real deficiency because it's so present in our life and it impacts us. It impacts our economics. It impacts the politics that we live in. It impacts things like many of the protests and even violence in our culture. You're not going to understand, the largest country in the world and their economic system in China. And so again, that's just one example. Okay, if you don't understand that, and Marxism is a philosophy. It's also an economic system, but it is a philosophy. Karl Marx was a philosopher. Okay, and I'm trying to think of how far I should go with this. Like if you don't understand basic like Play-Doh, and I'm not talking about the little kid's toy, okay? so don't go
I was
there.
thinking about that. This is fine. It's fine, guys.
And people are like, oh, of course, man. I know that. I know Play-Doh, which, of course, was named after, tongue-in-cheek, Play-Doh, okay, Plato, right? So what can you not know? I mean, can you not know matter and form? Okay, if you don't know the difference between matter and form, I know people are like, oh, my gosh, he's looking at me because I don't know what that is. I mean, when you look at something and you only see the matter, you only see the physical part of it, well, then if you don't understand that there's a form there, that there's something beyond the matter, well, you're a materialist, and most materialists are atheists, and so you could get yourself into some trouble there. So these are just a few examples. And
We did have a comment from Scott saying Happy New Year. And then also, I think it was about the car things. You can just go search on YouTube for it. Any information, which is absolutely accurate.
Is he talking about the car raffle? Oh, the car thing. Okay.
I think car raffle could be brought up here, as a deep segue for GRM, but
Now,
it's fine.
It's funny because I know Scott. Scott's a good friend, and we had an unfortunate situation where my wife and our daughter were driving down from Kansas, and because of some malfunction with the engine, which we ended up getting replaced, all the oil was gone.
Oh no.
Okay, and so the engine broke. The engine was faulty, right? And I remember Scott, my friend Scott, was telling me he's like, do you not check the oil like every time you get gas? And I'm like, no. I mean, I don't do that. No. And I hardly ever check oil unless there's a light that's flashing in the car. But again, these are kind of things that, what do you need to know? I think most people should know how to fill oil. They should know how to do a tire change. I think, a lot of people probably don't even know how to change a tire. So anyway, Scott, thanks for your comments. And we appreciate that very much. So, when it comes to let's just go straight to the what can you not know about philosophy? Okay, I would say if and I don't know how many people out there watching right now, but can you name a few philosophers? Can you name what the contribution of, let's say, like Stoicism. Stoicism is very popular in our culture today. Do you know what a Stoic is? Do you know some of the basic premise? I mean, I could say like, oh, Joe's a very Stoic guy, which I don't think is the case.
Not at all. Not at all.
But people think of Stoicism as just being like a personality trait. Yeah. Well, Stoicism is a philosophy. And it's also tends to be pantheistic. It tends to be deterministic, which, when you talk about determinism, this is a very important concept in philosophy because this means that things are just going along in a certain way and you don't really have any say about it. Okay, so a Stoic would say you have to be kind of one with nature, and that's why they're Stoic, is they're like, don't stress it, because it's all kind of moving in a certain direction anyways.
So you just kind of accept it and just kind of just be silent.
Just go with the flow. I mean, and respond virtuously. They're big on virtuous, and so if something is happening, and it's actually a lot. Well, the reason that I think it appeals to a lot of people is that there's a certain letting go. There's a certain, like, I'm not in control here, and but it also tends towards atheism and like I said, determinism. Somebody like John Calvin related that to really theology, where everything's determined, whether you're going to heaven or hell. You have nothing. There's no free will. And so there's a lot of interplay between the philosophy and the theology and things like that. So how about Epicureanism? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we shall die. Yeah. Epicurus was influenced by a pre-Socratic Democritus. It's a materialistic kind of way of looking at the world. And because if we're only matter, and there is no soul, there's no afterlife, and
then it doesn't. Yeah.
Then the thing that you should strive for is pleasure.
Right. At that point in time, and tomorrow, who cares?
Yeah. Right. Just but they weren't like hedonists where let's go off and eat, and they did believe in some measure and some rule, but and in the end they believed that the most important thing was pleasure. And to avoid pain, and to have as much pleasure as possible. Now, here's another one that I think people should know, and you guys can disagree with me on this. When somebody like Rene Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," okay, what was he talking about? Okay, do you guys know what was that all about? I think, therefore I am. I mean, everybody's heard that. Okay, what about when, Friedrich Nietzsche said God is dead? What did he mean by that? And again, this may be getting a little bit into the weeds, but these are culturally significant statements that people have heard of, and I think that it's probably important for people to understand. What about the difference between rationalism and empiricism? Okay, have you ever heard those expressions?
I've heard the rationalism. I haven't heard the empiricists.
Yeah, so it's actually quite interesting, and I don't know that everybody should just kind of know this, as like you can't get by if you don't know this. But a rationalist believes that knowledge comes through reason. They typically think that there's innate knowledge, which means that you're born with knowledge that's already there. And all knowledge comes through the mind, whereas an empiricist would say knowledge comes through our senses. It comes through the experience of the world, you may have heard of something called the tabula rasa, or the blank slate, which means that you're born knowing nothing.
And you have to learn everything.
And everything, it makes an impression on you. Like John Locke was a famous empiricist, and he came up with, Aristotle to some degree as well. But so you start making these impressions, but everything that comes through experience. The brilliance of Thomas Aquinas is that he put the two together. He was not a strict empiricist or a strict rationalist, but he believed that all knowledge began with the senses, but then the senses inform the mind. Whereas somebody like Plato believed that a baby is born with all the knowledge already innately in their head.
That they already have, so they don't actually need to learn anything.
Yeah, but he also believed in the preexistence of the soul. So the soul already existed and had all the knowledge, and then it gets united with this troublesome body, and then the body is stupid, and so it has to go around. It's like, oh, okay, there's that bird. Okay, I already knew that, but now that I've seen it, I remember that I had this birdness in my head, right? Mm-hmm. So that's Plato's thing. So all right, so if you're out there and you want to comment on any of this, what else can you not know when it comes to philosophy, okay? Because it's something that every single one of us is doing every single day. Everybody has a philosophy, right? Everybody is thinking. Everybody is reasoning. Everybody's trying to figure stuff out. We're all philosophers. And so we might as well kind of take it seriously. And so if anybody comments, is Scott still with us?
I believe Scott's still with us. We did have some people on TikTok that are watching us.
Oh, is that right?
So
did they comment?
They have not commented. So please, if you guys are out there.
So you just see a number?
I see the number.
How many people on TikTok?
I have 33 total views.
Okay.
We're moving on.
All
up
right.
in the world.
I know we've kind of joked around about that because we always stereotypically think that everybody on TikTok is young, 15-year-olds or so. Yeah. I know that's not always the case. I'm not a big. Do you do TikTok?
I'm a fan of it. But if it went away, like I think they're saying, it wouldn't really bother me. Mm-hmm. Like I just find something else to.
So some countries have banned it, haven't they?
The U.S. there's a big court case. I think on the 19th
to ban it
of January. They're talking about banning it.
Oh wow! On what basis? Because it's Chinese, or
it's owned by a Chinese company, and so there's a big push by that. But,
wow! And there were a couple of countries that have banned social media for young people, right? Didn't they just say? Australia.
Australia just did it recently. I don't know. Like I think it passed certain areas in their government.
I wonder how they can do that, because if a young person's on a phone, how do they know how old they are?
They block that's the whole point, the whole age restriction, because they would have to verify their age. Mm-hmm. But how do you verify somebody? Their age, other than just saying,
what year were you born?
Confirm it.
Are you sure?
I used to do that.
Do you promise?
I used to do that on YouTube for doing downloading music and everything like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyways, welcome to all the people on TikTok. If you're out there, let me go through a few more of these. What can you not know when it comes to philosophy? And there are I mentioned Marx as a political philosopher. It would probably be very good to understand the philosophy of somebody like Machiavelli, because that's a word that we use a lot in our culture. Oh, he's so Machiavellian, right? I mean, we use this. And what exactly did Machiavelli believe? And Machiavelli was very early on, like he was in the, I think, 16th century. He was time like Protestant Reformation kind of time, and he believed that basically the end justifies the means. Okay, and that's a very important principle. And I would say this is probably one of the most important principles. Is, does the end justify the means? Okay, that's a philosophical question. Can you do whatever you need to do in order to get a good end? Okay, and then you'd be going into utilitarianism, because a utilitarianist would believe that as long as the most people receive happiness or pleasure because of an action, then it's good. Okay, everything is measured not so much by the principle or the foundational principle that you're living according, but whether or not whatever you do is making the most people happy and the least people are sad about it. Okay, so that would be utilitarianism, Machiavellianism. How about let me throw a couple more out at you. Existentialism.
That one I've definitely heard of that.
Yeah. Existentialism. Does anybody out there, and again, I'm not like, oh gosh, I'm so smart. I've been studying this stuff for so many years, and anybody that's out there could do something about whatever they're mostly interested in. Mm-hmm. And you could do a show about engineering, and I'd be on the other side of the glass going, I don't know that either. I'm sorry, I don't know that either. I'm sorry. But okay, but existentialism is something that I think you should at least have a working knowledge of it. And an existentialist would be somebody like Soren Kierkegaard was often thought to be the first existentialist. Friedrich Nietzsche, Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre was kind of the last big and very popular existentialist. But they would believe that a person makes themselves. Okay, so who we are, what we are, comes from inside us. They were very big on authenticity. Like to be an authentic person, I'm not looking from the outside. I'm not looking to see what the Catholic Church thinks I ought to be. I'm not conforming to some predetermined nature that was instilled in me, and because I'm a man, and because I'm, born in a certain age and a certain time, that there's certain expectations of how I'm supposed to be, is that all that comes from inside me. Okay, I determine who I am, and that would be one of the key points of existentialism. Is kind of self-making, I guess, in a sense, right? There's also something called pragmatism. Okay, pragmatism is something you probably ought to know about as well. And a pragmatist is similar to a utilitarianist in that what their philosophy is, do whatever works. Okay, so you look at the results, and you do a certain thing, and if it's not working, well, maybe this other option will work. Okay, that one's not working, maybe this. So you keep going for what works. Now, interestingly, one of the key pragmatists in the history of pragmatism was a guy named John Dewey. John Dewey is synonymous with American education because, like, the Dewey Decimal System was named after him. So a lot of the American education system was based on the philosophy of John Dewey and other pragmatists who came before him, like William James and a guy named Peirce. And you think, like, well, why not do that? I mean, that seems to work. If something's not working, you pivot and you do this. Well, then you also have to realize that is based on a Hegelian model of Georg Hegel, who had this dialectic, which meant that there's a thesis and an antithesis, that it's always based on conflict, and then a synthesis comes out of a thesis and antithesis, and then when you have a synthesis, that now is approached by another antithesis. And so Hegel believed that you're constantly moving, there's constant progression, constantly, but do you ever get to where you need to go? Whereas if it's not based on any kind of overall principle, kind of stable, like logos that's already predetermined, it's like you're always moving towards something, but you're never quite getting there. So that I think would be one of the complaints about pragmatism. But we live in a very pragmatic culture. We live in a very utilitarian culture, and so I think that's why at least a working knowledge of these things would be a good thing. I don't think you have to go digging into all the philosophers and learning all about them and all that, but I think, like I said at the beginning, what can you not know? What do you, just the basics, And also, I joke around about this sometimes. It's really fun at cocktail parties, because you can always, have some little conversation about them. So anyways, those are some of the things. There's a whole lot more that I have, written down here. But I also, I don't know if there's any comments or anybody that...
I haven't seen anything yet.
Okay, nothing else. Okay. I do want to also, as we go through the year and we continue back to the Father, as I said at the beginning, there was a build-up during the early centuries, let's say from the pre-Socratics to Socrates and Aristotle and Plato, through Augustine and Boethius and all the doctors of the church. Also Muslim and Jewish philosophers coming together and put together this beautiful synthesis in the High Middle Ages, in the age of scholasticism, which with people like Bonaventure and Aquinas and Duns Scotus and Albert the Great. And so I would argue that probably the height of like lucidity as a whole came in like the 13th century, and then it's been kind of declining ever since then. With all these other philosophies that I've been talking about, but the most important thing is the placement of Jesus Christ in the history of the world, the history of philosophy, right? Because when Jesus came in at a certain point in history, I mean, everything changed, and I would agree. I would say that even like in theology, where you have the Old Testament that points to Christ, and that everything in the New Law, the New Testament, comes after Christ, I think you can do the same thing in philosophy and say that every philosopher leading up to, 0 AD or the date that Jesus, came into the world, every one of those philosophers was leading up to and anticipating Jesus Christ, even if he didn't know it. And it's fascinating if you look at it this way, because if you go back and you look at the pre-Socratic philosophers, the Parmenides and the Pythagoras and Anaximander and Anaximenes and Anaxagoras and Heraclitus, and then going into the Stoics, most of them, for the most part, were pre-Christ, and then the Epicurus and all that. You can see so much that it's almost like God was not only inspiring the prophets and the theology people, like the Old Testament prophets leading up to Christ, but I think he was preparing the world from a rational, philosophical sense as well. And then Christ enters into the world, and then everything changed. And then everything after Christ, every philosophy, even the atheist ones, is always going to be based on the person of Jesus Christ. And the reason why is because, remember when I mentioned matter and form, okay? So you have the material world, and then you have the form, which really is the like birdness is form of birds, but you can't see birdness, right? Birdness is out there, but it's not in the material. The material bird is the so Jesus Christ, in the uniqueness of who he was, being God and man, God by his very nature is invisible, right? God is absolutely spiritual. And then Jesus Christ as the human being obviously was material, and he had a body, and he had emotions, and he had passions. And you bring these two together into a single person with two natures and two intellects and two wills, and nothing like that has ever happened or will ever happen again. And this is where you had not only the flashpoint of theology, and everything changes because God has entered physically into the world, but you also, from a philosophical standpoint, everything makes sense only by understanding Jesus Christ, right? So if you want to understand existentialism or phenomenology or utilitarianism or the pre-Socratics or Plato or Aristotle, and I don't know if anybody's like written a book about this or not, but it all converges on Jesus Christ. And in fact, so many the philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, who spent their entire most of their philosophy protesting against Christianity, but Christianity was
still they're either supporting it or fighting it.
Exactly. So they're either running towards it or they're running away from it. And I mean, every single one of them. I mean, there's not a single philosopher that you could ever point to that said Jesus Christ meant nothing to them. Now, obviously, the ones that lived before Jesus didn't consciously know that because he wasn't alive. And there's actually some debate about, some people say that somebody like Plato, who lived approximately 300 BC, some people say, well, he was influenced because he had some kind of contact with like the Old Testament writers who would have been in a different part of the world, right? I don't know that was the case.
I've always heard that like Aristotle and all them, like they would push for trying to change some of the thinking that the ancient world had, especially on some of the religion and the gods and what they meant in the world. Mm-hmm. And I think that it was needed to bring out the next phase of being a Christian, having a soul, having a life outside of the world.
Yeah. I'm not sure about that. And, it happened that in Athens, Greece, where all these, famous Greek philosophers lived, it was a very popular spot of people moving from one part of the world through trade and maritime activities, and people were coming through, and so you did have a lot of mixture of cultures, and you would have had a lot of different opinions and people discussing things and different opinions coming through, which probably contributed to their brilliance because they got to see a lot of different perspectives in the world. But so I don't know if Plato or Aristotle had any contact with like Judaism, with the Old Testament prophets, or that's a kind of a debated point in that right now. But
at no point was anything ever translated to the Greek that we know of at that point, right?
I don't think the Old Testament.
I don't believe any of it.
No, I mean the New Testament was mostly written in Greek.
Yeah.
I think,
But that's like after. But I'm like the
Yeah.
Old Testament at that point. I don't think.
yeah.
Like, there was no library or anything like that where they could study it or learn it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I'm
I
not
don't-
sure. I'm not sure. And there wasn't, you're not going to jump on a plane,
Yeah.
or travel was a lot more difficult. But Alexander the Great, whose private tutor was Aristotle, was the one who traveled the world, conquering the world, and so he brought a lot of Greek philosophy. But of course, this would have been. I don't know. That would have been about 300 BC or so. So he did travel, and Aristotle was his private tutor. So it's an interesting question. And I'll tell you what, I think we're about halfway through the hour, and there's a lot more I could talk about, but I think we've pretty much covered what I was hoping to cover. But I do want to highlight, as we go through the year and we have Back to the Father, I'd like to maybe dig into these themes a little bit more and educate you just a little bit about some of the principles of philosophy that might be of interest to you. Because, as I mentioned, I think there are some things that we can't not know when it comes to philosophy, and it will help us out a lot. It's also kind of cool to see, like I said, how Jesus Christ, the incarnate, God-man, plays into the history of the world, not only theologically, but also philosophically, and how philosophy kind of, at least in my opinion, reaches the apex in the 13th century, and how it's kind of been dismantled to some degree ever since. So anyways, I am so grateful.
I guess we're going to do a philosophy in the year, steal from Father Mike Schmidt.
I don't know how you would do that, because he's using Bible in a year.
Yeah,
or,
we'd have to do
like
something.
Yeah. Some people have talked about like the Summa in a year, but that would be tough, because the language and the way it's written is not conducive to just reading it. And have you done any of Father Mike's stuff?
I have. I've started doing it this year. That was one of my goals.
The Bible
this
or the
year.
Catechism?
The Catechism in the year.
Okay.
Was one of my goals.
And are you 4 days into it now?
No, I am 1.5 days.
Okay,
So
all right.
we're gonna. It's not started well, but
Yeah.
hopefully we can pick up steam.
Yeah, well, that's and I think your mom and dad did the Bible in a year. And
They
I
did that
think-
last year.
Okay, they did it last year, but I got to admit, I started the Bible in a year, and I got probably about a third into it, and it's one of those things. It's tough unless you're really disciplined and you're like every single day at 6 o'clock, I'm going to wake up. I got 30 minutes, and there's not going to be anything that ever interrupts my.
Yeah.
There's no share-a-thons. There's nothing that needs to. But I tried. Okay, well, that's going to do it. Again, we'll tackle some other themes related to philosophy, but always kind of coming back to St. Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor, the doctor of the doctors, here on Back to the Father. If you would like to join our email list, typically we send out an email and we let you know what the topic is going to be that particular day. The email is backtothefather@grnonline.com, backtothefather@grnonline.com. And most Fridays, we are right here at 1 o'clock Central Time. I'm very grateful for Joe filling in for Sissel today. And let's see, I think we will be here next Friday. So we'll see you next Friday with a new topic. And we appreciate you very much. God bless you. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.